The objective: to deliver the NBA to you like no other. News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gun. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast. S here. No Lauren this week. She'll be back. I promise you. We're going to be talking about NBA playoffs in no time. But I had to take a break from the NBA playoffs for a second to talk about a team that is not in the playoffs, and that is the Toronto Raptors. This morning at 10 a.m., to the chagrin of Samson Folk, who is joining us, Raptors Republic writer, aficionado, whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure what the official title is here, actually. What is the official title? Yeah, janitor, what's the janitor custodian for Raptors Republic? No, we are joined today by Samson Folk in lieu of Lauren not being here, but honestly could not have asked for a better guest because of what happened today with the Toronto Raptors. Nick Nurse is out, fired, if you will. He is gone, finished, finito. His tenure with the Raptors is over. And in his place, what happens next? There are tons of questions in terms of what the Raptors offseason looks like, who they might hire as the replacement. They have multiple questions in terms of the roster. Masai Ujiri jumped in for a press conference. There's a lot of craziness happening in Raptors world right now. And Samson has taken the time out of his very, very busy day to come and talk to us here at the Objective Basketball Podcast. So, Samson, overall vibes of your day, how it all went down, your feelings in general, your thoughts, if you will, just to open things up. Let's warm it up here. How are you feeling?
I have a question first. If Lauren's not on this episode, do you guys still do the intro that's like the Objective Basketball?
Yeah, we do.
Hell yeah. I'm very glad to be adjacent to that. The day, I'm tired. It's been like running. What is it? A gambit? I don't know what that term is, to be quite honest with you, but it started out early for me. It's been going on. It's been a lot of talking, a lot of coverage, because I think William Liu said it when we were there at the press room. He's like, I don't know if it was this packed for the championship presser. You know, the fact that it was the end of season for Masai, right. They scheduled it yesterday, but Nicky Nurse got fired this morning. Right. It meant a lot of people were playing catch up and showing up and all that kind of stuff. Like, there wasn't an inch of space in that room. And so I was a person who I thought Nick Nurse was going to get fired. I also, when Nick Nurse was saying, well, I might decide to do something else, I was like, why are we reframing this as if this is Nurse's decision? Like, that's really incredible he managed to do that in media. Right. The Raptors didn't want him, you know, and he got fired. They wanted to go a different way. That way, we don't really know yet. Right. I guess we'll see. Yeah. But a different way than Nick. And I thought, considering the stuff I heard, interpersonal stuff for Nick, it didn't surprise me, and I support the decision.
Right. So I actually, that brings up a good point, because I think the discussion that I'm seeing online, it's you know, there's sort of this split. Oh, who's to blame? Who's to put, you know, who are we pointing the finger at for this disappointing season for the Raptors? Some people lean towards Nurse and, you know, the inability to develop the end of bench talent, maybe squeeze whatever juice you may think has not been squeezed out of the Raptors roster. But then there are others who say it's a roster construction thing. It's those things don't have to be mutually exclusive, but I'm wondering where you land on it.
I think that the Raptors are certainly a talented enough team. They are a collective that is imperfect in how they were kind of formed together. The roster construction has holes. Certainly it does. And I think Nick Nurse did an okay job making those, you know, dancing around those holes and kind of making that work last season especially. But I think the largest problem for this team was the lack of consistent buy-in. And I think that was the case for a few reasons, that there's a lot of contracts coming up. They're failing more than they're used to, a lot of these guys. and that the head coach is no longer resonating with his players. Buy-in is harder to achieve when people don't ride with you the same way. They don't believe in what you're preaching. And particularly at the top end, the result of the ideal style of play of Nick Nurse perhaps is hurt bodies, is like a lot of pressure, a lot of grind. And Nick Nurse, Nick Nurse was working to win games because correctly identifying if Malachi Flynn develops into a player, Malachi Flynn gets paid for that. Nick Nurse doesn't really get paid for that. If Nick Nurse wins 48 games instead of 41, that means something to him, to the Raptors, to the league. And so he was trying to win games, and he was trying to do things his way all the time. And I think we saw this with Nate Bjorkgren in the Pacers. And I talked about, to Nick about this during his exit interview, is like, how do you recognize in a culture that's particularly strong when something's wrong? Is that difficult? And the Raptors went wrong ways, culture-wise. They lost themselves. Masai talked about it ad nauseum. And Nick was part of losing that culture. I've used the term, people will probably recognize it a little bit more now, but I've used the term organizational rot a few times. The Raptors were losing the essence of themselves that kind of created the dominant perspective of the team, like this extremely well-run organization where everyone succeeds, and if they're not succeeding with the Raptors, then they move on to succeed elsewhere, and everything's good all the time. And that's just not the case anymore. They have to try and find it again.
It's interesting you say that, because there's always this need to find out what the root cause of the problem is. Like where can we cut out, how like with a dying plant they'll say like, oh, you got to cut out the part that's dying and then refresh. I don't know.
Cancer.
The cancer of it, right? What is do you think that was, because it's sort of being framed in the way that it was Nurse, and maybe the problems culturally, organizationally will be now forever solved with that. Do you think that is the case, or would you say it's multiple different things that have kind of created this environment, this cultural lapse, if you will?
They've got a ways to go regardless of Nick being there.
Right.
But Nick no longer being there gives them a clear line of demarcation and new starting point. And it's also going to coincide probably with guys getting contracts.
Right.
So the Raptors, they used the term organizational reset, something like that in 2018, or culture reset, whatever it was at that point in time. The Raptors, not only could they kind of pitch that as their sell for what's happening, but in reality, they can shore up a lot of things and kind of craft a new direction. Right. If, like I suspect, this isn't a team that's dominated by its stars as far as how it operates as a front office, as far as how it operates as like a play style on the floor. I think like Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, I don't think they're as domineering or as dominating as a lot of other stars in the NBA. Of course they care. Of course they have a say. But I don't think they're like, it's my way or the highway, and the Raptors just bow and they play that style.
Right. I think they're not using their power to maneuver whatever is happening in the background. Right.
And I don't think they have that power either, right? Probably wouldn't in any organization. But I think that the Raptors front office and Nick Nurse, while they had been aligned on a lot of stuff, once that stopped working, the front office probably views themselves as more malleable and can work with the next coach. You're not going to hit the whole front office isn't going to
isn't going to be like, you know what, my bad.
Yeah. Even though Masai gets to say, I'm pointing the finger at myself too, but he's keeping the job, Right. So that's what I think it is. There's a lot of stuff going on for the Raptors, but they have an opportunity with contracts being signed to kind of, renew the wedding vows, perhaps. Is that the analogy? You're a married man. How does that work?
It's like the honeymoon stage, things get refreshed after a while.
Sure.
I could imagine, and we'll talk about this now, whatever coach ends up coming there next season, I could imagine a little bit of a honeymoon phase. Everything's good, all smiles, everybody's answering questions, shaking hands, kissing babies, right?
When I ask him specific like schematic stuff, he says, "That's a good question." I'm like, "Wow, this guy."
Yeah. He's gonna do the point like Eric Spoelstra does for Brady Hawk, he just does the point, I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens moving forward. When it comes to the overall disappointment of the season, though, and what this season has bogged down to, do you feel as if there is a clear line of demarcation? Do you think that there's so many questions moving forward, but do you think there has been a line drawn now? Yeah.
But I also think probably not for fans, because fans don't get closure. Because, for example, Pascal Siakam and Nick Nurse, everybody knows what happened with them.
Yeah.
How did they end up working together? Sure, it wasn't the best. Earl Watson was the liaison. Earl Watson was Pascal's guy. But Pascal and Nick had to have that conversation. They had to fix things up on their end, at least to create a modicum of respect and professionalism and everything like that, right?
Right.
No, fans don't get that. Fans get, you're fired or you're gone from the team. There's no middle ground. So fans don't get the line of demarcation. The guys there, they can recommit internally. They can do all that kind of stuff. And they're going to be in a position for fans. They got to come out and be 12-5, 13-8,
right.
20-12 to start the season. Something like that, right? Otherwise, why would fans believe it? Yeah. And I don't blame fans either, because there's like an information deficit. They prove it with their play on the floor. So I think they'll internally be like, we can start new, we can do all this kind of stuff. But fans will be like, this is the same damn team that lost to Chicago in the 9-10 game, until they aren't. And they have to prove that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, look, thank you for helping me with my segue here. They disappointed playoff wise, and I mean, not making it to the playoffs. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is playoff time, though. Get in on the action. Make your next bet with Sports Interaction. Bet before the game or live in play on all your favorite teams and matchups. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN or download the app to get started. 18 plus. Please play responsibly. Okay, so the playoffs are done for the Raptors. That is.
It didn't even start.
It didn't even start. You're right. It didn't even start. I wanna look at, there has been conversations, reports, if you will, about who may take on the Nurse job, who may take on the Raptors job. The one person that has jumped up is Ime Udoka, right? And there's tons of controversy there. For the people who might be listening, you can go ahead and research it, Google it if you'd like. I don't know if you want to get into the moral grounds aspect of things, but I wanted to ask you, just from a culture changing, hey, let's change the guard type of perspective, what would an Ime Udoka hire potentially mean for this team? And you mentioned it like a minute ago, about the fans and what they'd be expecting. How would that be perceived by fans if it's Ime Udoka as the next coach of the Raptors?
I think, unfortunately, Ime Udoka is a mirror for a lot of people's beliefs on female interactions.
Right.
Particularly those that relate to the workplace. You can I did a live stream, and my answer to this was like, I don't know, but for my job, it's easier if they don't hire Ime, because suddenly you're like, a politics reporter. Suddenly, like, everything means so much more because you're dealing with this kind of stuff. But the thing about it is that it is certainly not a move away from controversy. It is certainly not a move away from that kind of stuff. Do the Raptors think that Ime Udoka could be the personality in a locker room, an NBA locker room? And, we kind of know what's going on there. Could he be the personality to command talented players? Is he also a good coach as far as like what he wants to run? Yeah. How what they run defensively, how he attunes the scheme to his players, all that kind of stuff, certainly. But he hasn't been hired. The Nets moved away from him. He's in connection with the Rockets, but I would, because just from what I've heard, Ari, the consensual relationship as far as, yes, I want to do this, but then power dynamics that were brought into it, right?
Yeah.
Workplace power dynamics. And then the reported harassment after.
Right.
Different people.
All of this has been reported, by the way. This is like,
yes.
You can go ahead and, yeah.
Different people believe different aspects of this. Right. Some people will simplify it to make it into, so a guy is sleeping with a girl. Some people will walk it all the way to, this guy shouldn't be in the NBA. This was a predatory relationship. Yeah. You know, like all this kind of stuff. I lean farther towards the right side of things, saying, I think the way that he comported himself was inappropriate, especially if the harassment is true.
Absolutely.
But the thing is that we talked about information deficits. The tough part of this is that you have to believe, really believe, that your organization is one that will act ethically, because the organization is the one that's going to have the investigation. The organization is the one that's going to be privy to all the conversations, all the asking around, all that kind of stuff. The Raptors,
their due diligence, if you will, right?
The Raptors really protected Terrence Davis. The Raptors brought on Rodions Kurucs. Really nothing to gain, but these are not pro-women decisions.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that the Raptors can't do a great job and figure out exactly the truth to the best of their ability on the Ime Udoka situation, but it does give you a reference point to say that they have made decisions that were not necessarily as ethical as possible in the past, which is important context. I answered nothing. I just couched.
No, I think you gave a perspective of, from where you're sitting as a reporter, as a beat writer for the team, how that process would look like, because I think
pretty self-indulgent. If you
it's okay. It's all right. It's not bad. It's okay to be self-indulgent every now and then. Okay, anyways, the Udoka situation, we'll see what happens, because it seems like at the very least between the Nets, between the Rockets, and now the Raptors, there is consideration around the league for him getting rehired and being back in the NBA. I think, at least from the general public standpoint, where you stand and where you fall on how right or morally correct that is up to you. But I think overall, there seems to be, at least from a organizational perspective, a level of general acceptance that he will end up coaching in the NBA again. I'm not sure where that ends up, how he ends up playing. I think generally there seems to be this level that he will come back into the NBA. When it comes to other coaches, though, there have been other names that have been mentioned. There's other coaches, assistants that have been linked to the Raptors, if you will, assistants around the league. Does anybody like pique your interest? Is there anybody that you're like, ooh, I think it would be very interesting if the Raptors hired this person?
So I don't think, like, obviously.
And also, actually, so knowing you and knowing your opinion on how coaching, how impactful coaching truly is in the NBA, I want you to tell me if you think it's that important, if it's even important, like who they're going to pick in the first place. But yes, go ahead. Sorry.
I was literally about to spring right into that. You know my brain inside and out, dude. The Raptors had a better offensive rating this season than they did last season, I believe. The Raptors were the number one team in after timeouts last season. Yeah. Like, as far as drop the play, make it work, hit a shot, coaching. They were number one. This year they were really bad. And somehow the offense was still better. Because when the coach isn't interfering and the players are playing, it's like, it's mostly the players doing it. That being said, a coach has to be able to instill hierarchy of some sort. And that was probably where I felt the most listless about Nick Nurse. And was that, he is pretty laissez-faire, pretty hands-off. And defensively, I think he was, for a long time, just attuning the roster to who was there. The Raptors couldn't play conventional defense. They had to play the Vision 6-9 style because that was who was on the roster. They have a pathway to good conventional defense that can also ratchet up into some more aggressive packages now. They were fourth, I think, since the All-Star break or since the trade deadline. I think that it should be attainable for a coach to come in and really play, like, continue to play that defensive style that the Raptors found towards the end of the season, but also to make sure and to try and get guys to commit and try and get guys to buy in offensively, to care, to make sure that, like, I said this elsewhere, but if you're running a play for a guy who's not like elite, if you run a play, for example, a pick and roll with a pin in screen so you can create a more wide open shot in the corner or something like that. If it's Kevin Durant in the corner, that pin in screen, it doesn't have to be good or bad, because if it ends up in Kevin Durant's hands, he can score the ball. Mm-hmm. If it's Malachi Flynn in the corner, you either get maybe like a 40% shot at that 3 ball going in. If it's a good pin in screen, it's set and he gets a look. But if it isn't a good screen, if the guy off ball isn't bought into the 5-man offense that's happening, then it's going to end up with the ball resting in Malachi Flynn's hands with the defender, in front of him. That's not good offense there. Mm-hmm. And that's just like, that's buy-in. That's also structure. And so I want a coach who's likable. I want a coach.
You want Mike Brown. You want the Mike Brown vibe, like the, I mean, when you say buy-in, when you say like structurally getting someone to commit, I think the Mike Brown example is really potent, because if you look at a team, it's like, okay, they did make some roster overhauls throughout the summer, the Sacramento Kings I'm talking about, but overall, it seems like the team has bought in to their style, to the way they want to play, to committing to, hey, we're going to get an open shot for Kevin Huerter on this possession, and that's what we're going to do. There's going to be a million dribble handoff set up directly for Kevin Huerter to get an open shot, and everybody's going to buy into that being the hierarchy of it. You look at the Raptors this season, I can count way too many times the amount of times I've seen either Pascal looking and waiting off ball, being like, wait, what's going on? What's going on? And like shaking his hands and be like, what happened? Scotty does the same thing. Fred has done that. You see these guys outwardly show their frustration on offense. And I think a lot of that goes back to that structure. Would you agree? Do you think that is? Yeah,
definitely. I think the biggest thing is that buy-in. People said Frank Vogel couldn't coach a championship team until he did. I'm sure when Nick Nurse got hired, everybody was like, he's coaching a Kawhi Leonard-led team? No way. Everyone said Mike Budenholzer was a meme. He couldn't do it. He won a championship as a coach. The general consensus on coaches, nobody has any idea.
Right.
Really. So just make sure that the people there like them. I know that's not particularly insightful, especially as a guy who, a lot of my work is like X's and O's and breakdowns of strategy. But truthfully, I mean, you got to have effort goes a long way, man, and care and intention. It really does.
Well, it's like, I love what you do, obviously, with the plays and breaking things down, obviously. But I think what's interesting is like most of the NBA, it's an open book, right? People know what the other team is running. Most teams run the same things consistently. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to gain an advantage that way versus gaining an advantage buy-in wise, structurally, what we're going to, who believes that. Like, I know these things are all intangible, like platitude type things to sometimes say, but it does matter. It is important to have someone who can be that cultural undertone for whatever you're trying to build. When it comes to the rest of it, everything outside of coaching, because we've talked about coaching for now 20 minutes here. When it comes to the rest of it, what happens in the offseason, where you're feeling even Messiah Ujiri said, we're thinking of shakeups, big and small, right? He left a lot of room for there to be interpretations of which way they will decide to go. Where do you tend to lean on that? What do you think they are leaning towards some sort of resets, or do you think they are still in the sphere of trying to build around this team?
I think there's always a chance that maybe it's not a blockbuster if it's the Raptors selling, on a guy like Pascal. That probably, maybe some people consider that a blockbuster, some people don't. I don't know how tenable it is for the Raptors to achieve a blockbuster of their own. It seemed like last offseason was their opportunity. Donovan Mitchell, you wonderful pull-up Prince, you. You can never rule out a big move, but I think it's probably more likely that the Raptors try and negotiate really good contracts, try and make sure that their guys are on good deals going forward. And for a guy who talked about parity and kept really going back to that, Masai, those are the things that won't get clipped. Those are the things that won't proliferate. And it seemed like that was his real feeling and emotion on it. He was like, you never know who's going to win. There's so much parity. We have a good team. But as far as, he was having it both ways. He's like, seemed to be signaling that I like this team. We're going to try. And maybe that's posturing for future trades, or perhaps he actually does like it. But as far as a shakeup, that could also be posturing. Like,
right? Yeah,
you never really know. Like these guys, they get up and talk. Yeah.
He wasn't gonna give the whole game plan down. I was actually. It's funny you mentioned that. The thing that caught my eye was him saying like, "Oh, free agency is these trades now. Like we never know what's gonna happen." If there's someone who is going to be disgruntled this year. So maybe they are still thinking about big fish hunting. Like maybe there is that room to consider them going for whatever insert name star is going to be out there in the summer. I'm sure it's going to happen. I'm sure someone is going to be available. But do you feel as if you had to go ahead and pick, obviously between Fred VanVleet, who's a free agent, Jakob Poeltl, free agent, Gary Trent Jr., free agent, do you think all of them stay? Do you think what's the percentage chance you would give of all three of those guys ending up being Raptors next season?
Maybe like
knowing the money situation and everything.
Yeah. Maybe like 60%.
60. Okay.
Yeah. I think the guy most conceivably most likely to be dealt is probably Gary.
Right.
If I had to guess.
Yeah,
but
I think so too. I would love to, if this was a longer form podcast, to get your opinions on each and every single Raptor and just get you to ramble for 5 minutes. But
that's what Lewis and I are going to do on Sunday. Except, we did that last year. It was like a 4-hour podcast. It's terrible.
I wanted to ask about a specific question you had to Masai, which was about the internal growth and just Scotty in general, what he's had buy-in wise. On the radio today, they asked me, they're like, hey, so is it really all on Scotty? Is it all on him to be the bridge between one generation to the other? And I said plainly, like, the answer is yes. They are banking on him being that guy. From what you've seen this season, you obviously have done extensive work. If people have not read your work at Raptors Republic when it comes to Scotty Barnes, they're making a mistake. You need to go ahead and do this. And if you're a Raptors fan, how are you not tuned into Samson Folk or any of the other great things that Raptors Republic does? But you have done an extensive amount of work when it comes to watching Scotty Barnes. Between year 1, year 2, and now, next season, year 3, do you think it is fair for us to still have that expectation that he is the bridge, that he is the connector, the all-encompassing piece that puts this together? Do you think that is a fair expectation to have?
I think it's probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Good teams don't force players into bridge scenarios, I think. Jakob Poeltl was the 9th overall pick, and he had very meager expectations at that point in time because the Raptors had already built a good team.
Yeah.
DeMar DeRozan was the 9th overall pick, and of course he became great, but half the fan base wanted to trade him for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and a first-round pick, and then go with KCP and Terrence Ross on the wing in 2013, I believe, right? Like, that's the truth of it, is that DeMar needed time, and it was a good thing Kyle Lowry was there, because who knows what that team would have looked like. It's a good thing they kept Kyle Lowry. It's players need to be able to grow next to other good players, and they need to be in positions where they aren't the bridge. If a player is a bridge, hey, you've got a bridge. But I'll be damned if most players aren't Bridges. S.
Right.
You know? Not Bridge
enough.
S. Okay? I'm telling you. I think I still see like an all-star in Scotty, but there's just so much in his game as far as providing on-ball creation that you just need more. If it comes, hell yeah.
Sure.
Good on you, Scotty, for working this into your game. Now this is of utility at the NBA level against NBA defenders, against NBA schemes. But that's just not there right now. I think he has to come along at his own time. And you can always hope that like this guy just hits the turbo button and you get to fast track to a different type of, team. But in most cases, most players, even the guys who end up like at the back end of the Hall of Fame, even guys who end up making all-star teams, even guys who hit All-NBA, Julius Randle's probably going to make All-NBA for the second time. He was a third overall pick. Yeah. Nobody said he was a bridge. It's just like, it's hard.
Yeah.
Expectations are probably too high for Scotty, which doesn't mean he's not going to be great, but it's just like rarely do players transform teams. It's just not super common.
No, you're right. Like it requires a level of superstardom. Like Steph Curry is a guy who completely transformed a team, revolutionized the franchise. Potentially even like there's maybe even a city. I don't know. I just think it's tough to put that type of expectation on him. You've mentioned it, but
and only because he made $12 million a year. Right. While he was an MVP, because his ankles were all screwed up and people were like, is this guy going to play?
And year 3 Steph was like, you can't even compare to what he is. There's a level of growth. Like everybody has their own pace, right? Everybody has their own pace, and you can't bank everything on that pace being accelerated, especially when the playground for which he is in isn't necessarily a playground that is conducive to accelerating that process. Especially this season, he was asked to work within a system. He was asked to, figure out where he can contribute and work on certain areas where maybe he's not the strongest in. So I think that's the most interesting aspect of it to me is like, how do they quote unquote try to accelerate this process given where they are team wise and, with the Pascals, the OGs, the Freds, how are they going to fit and maneuver all of that in, which kind of goes to this next question I have for you. If you're looking at the grand scheme of Raptors basketball and what's moving forward, they obviously have a huge depth issue, shooting issue. Do you think there are tangible ways for them to actually solve those problems this offseason? I had a video about it just now detailing the Raptors offseason. You have talked about this ad nauseum as well, in a great way, ad nauseum in a good way. I know we throw that around. It's a good ad nauseum. But like, do you think there is a tangible way for this team to improve on those fronts that need improvement?
Well, let me throw it back to you first. I've been busy today. I haven't been able to watch your video, but like, give me the cliff notes. What do you think?
I think there's so many. The Raptors money wise don't necessarily have the ability to work a maneuver. Like there's this perceived flexibility that the Raptors have, but actually it's not a ton of flexibility. It's like this idea that, oh yeah, we have the bird rights to all of these guys. And Blake Murphy has talked about this, that bird rights trap, right? But like, it's this idea of, oh, we have the players in deck. We can sign all these guys. There's a lot of talent on this team. But, oh, by the way, money's getting tight and we're not willing to go over the luxury tax. And that makes it much harder because you need affordable players that can do the things that you're bad at. So now not only are you looking to solve your shooting problem and solve your bench problem, but you're also trying to do it in an affordable way. And I don't know how they can thread that needle without taking out a Jenga block, which is one of their cores, right? It's like unless you decide, hey, we're going to move on from an OG Anunoby, or if we're going to move on from Fred or Gary or whatever, unless you move one of these guys, money-wise, it's just not going to work to be able to solve the problems of shooting, to solve the bench problem. So that's where the video kind of went. It's like they're trying to thread an impossible needle. That's what they're trying to do this offseason. And I'm not sure if they'll be able to do it. But yeah.
I think the Birds Rights trap should be called the Travis Scott or something like that. Trap. I think that bringing in Jakob Poeltl was a really great way to make them better this season and make their defense much better. It really did. Everybody got their jokes off about his on-offs and just how much of an astounding impact he had. But the fact of the matter is, Pascal and Scotty together playing, the 3 and the 4, it makes sense if you're 5, if one of them offensively moves up to the 5, so you can put shooting in elsewhere, or if you have a stretch 5. And the Raptors, they transitioned to a Fred VanVleet-led offense after Poeltl came. They ran a lot more pick and roll through them. They did a good job. Credit to both those guys. They're both going to make more money this offseason for that reason. And the Raptors did play better for that reason. But Pascal's your best player. Scotty's up and coming. This was a decision that puts the impetus on those guys more than anybody else, because Gary shoots it well. OG shoots it well. Fred didn't shoot it well this season, but we don't have to. It's not a referendum. We don't have to rehash that. He's a good shooter. Yeah. If anybody's going to start shooting, it's not going to be Poeltl. It's probably not going to be Scotty. Mm-hmm. And Pascal has the largest history of it, being able to do it, especially set shooting. Pascal holds the key, honestly. 36% above the break on catch and shoots, a little bit of pull-up volume, and he's got to hit from the corners, and he's got to pull, man. If Pascal doesn't do that, and maybe it's not fair because he does so many other good things, but if Pascal doesn't do that, it's really, really hard to see the structure of this offense being healthy in a half-court sense. And they'll be a good defense next year. But this is why when I talked to Michael Grange, he probably brought up, he definitely brought up, but I'm thinking this is why he brought up Pascal, is like, use Pascal's value to get more skill sets that fit better and still get good players, maybe a pick or something. I'm not sure how much I like that. I really like Pascal. I like him on the Raptors, but you're right. It's Jenga. It's really tough to make this work. Internal development sometimes can fix all things, but the Raptors bet on internal development this season, and they lost at everything. Mm-hmm. So it's very tough. It's very difficult, but I think a lot of it sits on Pascal's shoulders. As the best player on the team, he has to take himself to the next level, and he's like an insane workout guy. He'll be in the gym this summer trying to make it happen. So we'll see.
I share your love for Pascal. I think he's awesome. I think it's weird to bank it on that, because when you look at he has had to work in a very, very small environment on a basketball court. The
Raptors haven't helped him either. They haven't.
Right. Yeah. And the guys that work and make sense around a guy like Pascal are guys like Gary or Fred to a certain extent as well. These are the guys who can space the floor for him, the guys who can work a dribble handoff every now and then. He can, you can these are the type of things that just, they work towards the skill set of a guy like Pascal, which is also similar to a skill set in a guy like Scotty, which is also similar to a skill set maybe that you could compare to a guy like OG, which is also similar to, you can just keep going down.
I don't think OG has the foundational skill set.
Agreed.
And I finally feel that way. I was like, we'll see. He'll get more possessions. Who knows? But you're absolutely correct. Pascal is a guy who, if he operates in spacing, he should be incredible. Pascal could hardly shoot off the dribble, and he was scoring like crazy. He won most improved player because the Raptors had Danny Green, Kyle Lowry, Kawhi Leonard, and then by the end of the season, Marc Gasol. But Serge Ibaka on the floor. It's like, was that a lot of shooting for 2018-19?
That was
Sounds like a lot of shooting.
Yeah.
And then 2019-20, where the Raptors were one of the best three-point shooting teams in the league, and everybody hit well from downtown. It's like, did the guy whose whole star bid being built on special movement skills dominate in open space? Sounds like he did. And the Raptors, I don't know if they can build that team now is the problem. And he's 29 and extension coming up. I guess we'll see. But It's tough, man. It seems easy defensively, this team in the future. Offensively, I don't know if it seems easy.
Speaking of questions, there are people who have asked you a lieu of questions. Everybody has been talking. There have been 25 questions asked to you, which is a considerable amount of questions. So I'm not going to go off and ask all of them. I apologize to the people who may be tapping in and saying, how dare you?
I'm glad you're choosing them, so I'm not the one turning it down.
Oh, man. So look, there's a few that I have selected here. And some of them have been rehashed. Okay. Some of we've done the talking and going through here so far. So Armchair Hoops is asking you, how high of a ceiling do you think the Raptors can reach? We just talked about this though, with 3 non-shooting threats in their starting lineup, that all like to operate in the same area. What would you need to add, subtract from the rest of the roster to make the combination viable in the modern NBA?
Okay. I think we answered what could conceivably happen to make it viable. It's tough, but I think they could be as high as like the 5th or 6th seed next year if the good shooters on the roster hit their shots. And I think 5th or 6th is pretty decent outcome for them. The East is good. Being next year being the 5th seed or the 6th seed is probably a pretty impressive team. I think that's maybe the ceiling for next season.
I've tweeted this a bunch of times, but if Jakob was on the team for the entire season, I could see them competing with the Knicks and the Nets and the Heat of the world, and maybe even the Cavs. Who knows?
It's a shame Nick Nurse is gone because he was going to teach Jakob how to shoot threes, but now that's no longer the case.
Our good friend Hoop Goose, he said, also, do you think this core has topped out, or do you think they have another level to go? So do you think this iteration of this core, what do you think?
It's probably topped out.
Okay.
And it's because the starters are really good starters, but they just don't have that support at the back end. And they're in the luxury tax if they bring everybody back. Luxury tax is usually for contending teams. Luxury tax, as we discussed, it infringes upon your ability to shake and move. And outside of some genius trading from Bobby and Masai, I don't see how the Raptors get significantly better than the heights they've already achieved with like Pascal, Fred, Scotty.
Not even genius trading. It would have to be like swiper, no swiping, like levels of robbery that they would have to achieve to like it seems hard to be able to say, okay, we are trying to compete next year. We are trying to be a playoff team next year. And also, we don't have the bench, we don't have the bench or the shooting or the guard depth necessary to potentially do that. And we also don't have the money to spend to go out and get those things. And it just, these problems continue to pile on. And now you're left wondering, how are they going to thread a very impossible needle, right?
I think the bench could be okay next year. If we just if it's Gary, Precious, Boucher, whoever they draft, Koloko, maybe Doughton. There's enough good players to do something. If they can't do anything, like that's kind of the black spot on Nurse as well. It's like, the bench wasn't perfect, but like, what the hell's happening? Why isn't they're dependable? And it was a lack of structure for sure. It was a lack of consistency for those guys who need that stuff. But anyway, I digress. Hoop Goose, I don't even remember your question. I don't even know who you are.
Okay. Another one. Let's see what else we got here. You know what? We've not talked about OG a lot in this podcast.
Sure.
I feel like we'll do it. So Trey asked, your good friend, your podcast co-host here on the Trey podcast.
I'm not familiar.
He asked, what do you think happens to OG this summer? Do you think he gets moved? Do you think he gets re-signed? What's the spiel? What do you think?
I think OG stays.
Okay.
I think that he stays and he gets marginally better as a dribbler, perhaps marginally better, marginally, not marginally. Don't even know what that word means. I think he gets marginally better as a dribbler, as a pull-up artist, but probably not enough to completely change how he operates on this team. And I think he still remains like a defensive player of the year level defender and a guy who bangs threes and dunks everything at the rim, which is just an awesome player. And if he was on the right team in the right year, he could make an all-star team.
The vibe I'm getting from you is that it's going to be a run it back plus new coach. Let's see how this vibes work type of
think so.
season. Yeah.
And you can see, because it was a hot mic, I think it was the Global News version or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
It was a hot mic. You can see me walk out, approach Josh Sue, the PR person, and say, nobody ever approached me about the coaching position. Are you nobody messaged me? And he said, well, that starts after this. So maybe it'll be me, everybody.
I actually think that would be the right call.
Yeah.
Vibe wise, I think the
no. Only because you'd be adjacent to great wealth. That's all. I would suck at the job, but if I had the lowest paid coach's wage, I'd be happy, man. That'd be great.
Make doubles for me and the boys.
Yeah,
That's what I'm looking for. Hell yeah.
I'd pay the bill when we go to eat like you do regularly.
Oh, come on. We can't do that. Don't do that, man. Just because I got a mirror behind me, you can't be telling me
It's quite ornate. I'm going to be honest.
Ooh, that's a new word. I gotta.
No, it's actually quite old. I didn't invent it. Just. Any more questions from the people?
There's one, although I'm not entirely sure how to phrase it, so I'll read it out loud. Hopeful TTF Maple. He said, what do you think?
He was at the Raptors Republic live show. He was great. He was incredibly kind, and he has a really good video on Pascal Siakam on his YouTube channel.
He does. Yes, he sent it over to me as well. It was an awesome video. I will ask the question just to kind of get your idea on it. I think it's more philosophical type question. What do you think about the idea of doubling on the perimeter, but doing it using Atkinson's philosophy of having it based on whoever has the lowest shooting percentage rather than always from a predictable specific spot on the floor? Could be unique change for our philosophy. So I think he's asking, instead of saying, hey, we're going to take away the above the break three or the corner three, what about, kind of focusing on specific spots that the players are not good at, or whoever has the lowest true shooting percentage. You watch teams give space to Draymond and Sabonis in the playoffs now, completely letting them do whatever they want out in the perimeter. Is that the sort of philosophy that you think they should adopt? Toronto Raptors.
I think that they have done that in the past to some degree. In fact, we saw that maybe because they were really, really concerned about guarding Joel Embiid. But actually, you know what? When they weren't even guarding Embiid, we saw them do that to Jared Vanderbilt, right? Like the Raptors did that to Vanderbilt. And as far as that being like a central tenet of a defensive scheme, I don't think that's actually like a working tenet. I don't think that players are able to maintain like the 3-point shooting percentage and operate. I think it's something that the coaches come in and identify weaker shooters prior to it. And they'll be, if it's a weak enough shooter, they say, we help off of here, we do this. And I guess Atkinson, because he's spoken about it, gets the credit for that. But I think that's more or less conventional now in the NBA, as the guys who don't shoot have become very important to sag off of, because there's so much shooting and so much dynamism on the floor now that I think like the Raptors did this to some degree. The Raptors, yes,
they saw it be done to them with Scotty in early January.
Certainly. Right. And he did a really good job of figuring it out. Credit to him. But the Raptors, I don't think that like the Kenny Atkinson version of it is any more, doesn't have any more utility than just saying like, we're going to double from the top, we're going to double from the bottom, we're going to double on the catch, we're going to double once they reach middle, we're going to play no middle defense. Like all these tenets that are easier for players to adhere to without like actually moving around the floor thinking about shooting percentages or something like that. I think that, and like, it's a good question, seriously, because if players could do that, you know, but it's just, they don't. You're moving so much. NBA moves quick. And so that's like the ideal situation like that'd be great. But it's a little less specific when actually acted out. And I think that the Raptors will probably do that to some degree next season. And they did it to some degree this season, although it was, of course, mixed in with really aggressive schemes that sometimes the Raptors, like, they would double from the strong side. Or if you want to call it a double, you want to call it a dig, whatever you want to call it. But they would throw attention from crazy places. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that system would work better if everybody had a big, gigantic percentage sign on their chest, and then you could just see. It would be either red or green too, depending on how good they shoot from that area, right?
But so the NBA is like, we can't do that because that takes up what would be ad space.
Ad space.
Yeah.
So now you have to make it an ad sponsor. So it'd be like brought to you by, I don't know, what's a time. I don't know.
A numbered company or whatever. Yeah,
something.
Exactly.
I don't know. Kaiser Permanente's percentage clock. Look, Samson, it's been great. I wish we could go for longer. I don't think you wish we could go for longer. I think you're tired.
I'll stay here till the cows come home, dude.
Hey, no, it's been great as always. It's awesome to chat with you. Is there anything else you want to mention when it comes to everything that's happening Raptors wise? And then afterwards, if you got anything to plug, do your thing.
Man, there's a guy who has taken what was typically strictly a hockey channel and has helped grow the basketball aspect of it. And I've never built anything from scratch in that way. And he's done a fantastic job of producing
I just realized what
written content, podcast content, and video content, and kind of does it all. And he's like a multimedia wizard. That seems like a very 2006 saying, if I had to guess. But
multimedia
Esfandiar Baraheni has done tremendous work growing this platform for Steve Dangle Podcast Network, and I'm just happy to hop on.
Appreciate it, man.
That's how I feel about the end of the podcast.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it, dude. It's always great to chat with you, man. Always is. Anything you want to plug? Anything you got going on? I know you said
I did my plug.
The podcast and the writing and whatnot. Look, if you are not, again, I'll say it again. If you are not tapped in to what Samson and the rest of Raptors Republic do, if you're a Raptors fan and do not tap into that, you're missing out. You're missing out.
I actually have a plug. Tweet at Mountain Dew. Sponsor the Pull Up Trade podcast.
Hell yeah. Samson and I are at ends on this. I absolutely hate Mountain Dew. It's a part of our group chat discourse. We do not see eye to eye on this one. Mountain Dew is just not good. It just is. That's bottom tier choices.
That's fine. Trey, Shannon Sharp, Samson Folk, the triumvirate. Yeah, exactly. We are the Mountain Dew triumvirate, dude. Okay, that's fine.
Oh man. All right, folks. Listen, for the people who are listening, appreciate you guys. Again, thank you to Samson for jumping on the podcast. Do the things you guys usually do: the subscribing, the liking, the commenting, the reviewing, the rating, all that stuff. We appreciate you guys. We'll be back next week for another episode of the Objective Basketball Podcast. Take care.
Follow hosts at Just S Baraheni on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.